Hello and welcome to my Fireside. Today, I want to talk to you about the exception clause to the 13th Amendment. If you're wondering what that is, the 13th Amendment is the amendment of our Constitution that outlaws chattel slavery. The exception is if you are duly convicted of a crime. The state can use legally slavery as punishment. I don't think it takes much imagination to figure out how that could be abused. We hear a lot about abolishing private prisons. We hear a lot about prison conditions. We hear a lot about mass incarceration. But what is one of the main driving incentives for all of this? Well, of course, profit and the fact that it's legal for private companies and the state to trade in human bodies, in human lives. The United States incarcerates more people than anywhere else on the planet. The United States uses more forced labor than anywhere else on the planet. And it's not just with private prisons. Even publicly owned prisons, owned and operated by the state and the federal government, will use slave labor. Companies will outsource the state to use people as slaves. Private companies will own human bodies as human capital, just like they did pre-Civil War. The only difference is that now the law itself is not based on race. But what about the implementation? Well, if you've been following Black Lives Matter for any length of time recently, you know that Black people are convicted at much higher rates for the same crimes than white people. You know that they are sentenced on average to much longer sentences. And just like the black codes, we still have policies today which are reminiscent of them, like jaywalking, like stop and frisk, the war on drugs. These things are used to target minority communities, especially Black people. The proof is in the numbers. How many people are incarcerated? Now, you might be thinking, amending the Constitution is no easy feat. Well, it's not. You're right. But guess what? It is absolutely possible, and it is time. In the election of 2020, 2 states modified their state-level constitutions to remove the exception clause from their own constitutions. It was Utah and Nebraska. Utah's bill passed by 81% to remove our exception clause. Now, you might know that Utah is a very deeply conservative red state. So is Nebraska. Nebraska's bill passed, I believe, by around 72%. I could be wrong. Please correct me in the comments below. What does that tell you? Well, it tells me that there is huge, widespread support nationwide to get rid of the exception clause from the 13th Amendment. Why isn't it happening? Well, as we know, both major parties are largely owned by corporate interests. Corporate interests include private prisons and any companies that outsource slave labor through the state. There's billions of dollars to be made on slave labor, which is why The 13th Amendment and its exception clause have remained unchanged since the end of the Civil War. What is this going to take? Well, so far, all of our constitutional amendments after the Bill of Rights have gone through Congress and then are passed to the states. You need 2/3 of the vote in Congress. You need 3/4 of the states. It's a tall order. So what this is going to require is a massive pressure campaign. Both sides of the aisle need to feel this pressure. I've included some links down below for some organizations that you can sign up, and whether it's at the state level or the national level, to move forward. Because if we have to tackle this one state at a time or at the federal government, both strategies are needed right now. It will be easier to modify a single state constitution than it will to modify the federal constitution. In my opinion, both things need to be done in all 50 states. Every state constitution needs to make sure that there is no exception. Slavery must be illegal, period. There is no exception. We need that at the federal level as well. However you decide to join this movement is up to you. But we need as many voices as we can get. We need as many people on the ground as we can get. We need as many people writing and calling our legislators as possible. Here we are in the year 2021. Last summer, we saw protests nationwide that broke all previous records for Black Lives Matter. Huge, earth-shaking protests. We need to continue that energy, not just to defund the police, not just to seek social work programs and all of the wonderful things that are being worked on right now, but also to remove the legal ability for private companies in the state to trade human beings as capital. That one singular issue could solve an incredible number of problems. If it's no longer legal to punish people for arbitrary crimes oftentimes, well, then there's no way for them to use that labor anymore. There's no profit to be made in that way anymore. Just by that alone, if it's no longer profitable for a private company to exist, then they won't exist. Now, less important than the freedom of individuals, a little bit less important than justice, is economic justice, right? How is this linked to economic justice? Well, as long as millions of people are allowed to be placed in shackles and enslaved for their labor, it holds the price of labor down. It harms all workers, whether you're convicted of a crime or not. Now, this goes beyond the racist implementation of our laws and affects everybody. So please, join the movement for full and total abolition of slavery. Let your voice be heard. Don't let this get swept aside. Do not let it be forgotten. Thank you for coming to my fireside.